And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I am your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We're going to talk about the Steelers' victory over the Rams. We're going to preview the Steelers' Jags game coming up in week 8. We're also going to talk NFL trade deadline because we are less than a week away from that now. Steelers obviously made a big splash move last year. Can they do something similar this year? Maybe the other way around. We're going to talk about all those things. If I sound a little congested today, just getting over a cold, so bear with me. Let's kick things off, Shayne, with the Steelers' victory over the Rams in week 7. Yet another game where Pittsburgh was the underdogs and kind of sloppy. I mean, the first half did not give us a lot to be encouraged by.
No, and I think coming out of the bye, there was an expectation that, okay, something is going to be different. Maybe not necessarily more successful, at least not a ton more successful, but different. And it felt like a very similar game script that we've been dealing with for the past 2+ years, where cannot get anything going early. I think we punted on our first 2 drives, get a short field goal drive thanks to just getting good field position and getting 22 yards on I think 10 plays, whatever it was. It was very not, it wasn't exactly an exciting drive, right? But he gets us points. We had to go into the half down 9-3, and if it wasn't for some big plays like always, we probably wouldn't be looking at a victory in this game.
Yeah, can we open the game up with like a scoring drive, Shayne? Heaven forbid we get like a touchdown score on the opening drive. And I know that this has kind of become trend. Like we've expected the Steelers to punt those first couple of, if not 3 series to begin the game. Unfortunately, it's just kind of the way that it's been. Ultimately, the Steelers did pull out the victory 24-17. It took definitely some fluky things happening, kind of like it has all season long, Shayne. I mean, we were talking about 2 shanked field goals by the Los Angeles Rams. Brett Maher just missed too badly in this game, missed an extra point. One of the field goals doinked right off the upright there. And so the Steelers were fortunate it went that way because we could have been looking at a different outcome. And obviously missed field goals, Shayne, are part of the game. But it wasn't just the missed field goals, unfortunately. There were also some questionable calls, to say the least, in this game. And there were some on both sides. Like I cut up the TJ Watt offsides call, which eventually led to a Rams touchdown. And I think that was kind of a bogus call. You can kind of, I went frame by frame in the all 22 and it was not offsides. I mean, the guy was, he was clearly back and it shouldn't have been a flag that was called. The flag came out super late too. It was like 10 seconds after the fact. And so there was that, but there obviously the biggest call of the game was the spot call, which, I mean, let's face it, the Steelers came up half yard short. I don't know how else to say it. People trying to justify this. I know there's not an angle that is straight on. I know that the line could be off supposedly, but the Steelers were short on that. And then before that, Shayne, the Steelers were given a first down because of the Deontay Johnson pass interference drawn against Akella Witherspoon, former Steeler. I didn't think there was anything there at all. And so there were definitely a few questionable calls in this game.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately with the NFL, I mean, you saw it especially to a more serious extent with like the Eagles-Dolphins game, where like sometimes the refs just seem to kind of sway one way or the other. They make big calls, and that's part of the sport. And, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Steelers didn't benefit, especially late by those. But I will say like the pass interference thing, it's tough because like there's so much – there's basically a technique where like, okay, I can come back to the ball. And if the corner isn't looking at the ball or adjusting the ball and not me, I'm going to get the flag call. Like that's just kind of part of playing receiver in the NFL nowadays, which I don't personally like, but that is what it is. And then the fourth down call. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't really know what the refs were thinking with that one. I don't know how they got that spot. I mean, obviously we'll take it, but it was really unfortunate for the Rams that it happened at the joint in the game where it did, where it was before the 2-minute warning. They didn't have any timeouts. They blew them all because they were trying to get the ball back. And because of that, there was no replay review. There was no go up to the booth, figure it out. So they kind of it was this weird time in the game where it was the right moment for it to happen for the Steelers where they couldn't do anything about it, essentially.
Yeah, and I'm not complaining, Shayne, but I do want to see the Steelers win
Convincing.
handedly. I want to, I want to see a convincing win. And unfortunately, that is not the type of wins that we've been seeing at all. I mean, the only ones you can even remotely argue that has been somewhat convincing would be the game against the Raiders on Sunday Night Football.
Even though we let them hang around.
They did hold a 23-7 lead, I think, for a while in that game, and then they finally let them come back. But it might not have been the manner that we want. The Steelers got the job done eventually. in this contest, and I know that everybody say, well, in this game, theoretically, yes, the Rams, if the call wasn't blown at the end of the game, if the spot call was correct, the Rams would have had a chance. It didn't mean that the Rams were going to win that game, though, either, because they would have still had just over 2 minutes. They had no timeouts. They would have had to score a touchdown in that amount of time just to send the game into overtime. And so we're still looking at a ball game here. I mean, it still was one that the odds probably would have favored the Steelers like 75% still at that point, considering the circumstances and the fact that they couldn't have any other clock stoppages outside of that 2-minute warning. Regardless, Shayne, the Steelers sit at 4-2. They've already had their bye week. That's in the past. Now we're looking ahead to Jacksonville. We're going to talk about that game here in just a minute. Let's talk about the winners from this Steelers versus Rams game in week 7. Steelers obviously came into LA 3-point underdogs, but they pulled off the win. Who do you have as the winners for Pittsburgh in this one?
So let's start with TJ, right? We got to start with TJ Watt because, as always, even in a game where they basically were like, we're going to put 3 guys in your face so you can't affect Matthew Stafford directly, he found ways to impact the game, right? The main one, obviously, making maybe one of the most absurd plays of his career, coming off of the receiver while playing out in space and intercepting a pass meant for Cooper Kupp and almost taking it back to the house. Just this is the type of stuff like when people are talking about edge rusher rankings, right? We can all acknowledge like there's a lot of great pass rushers, pure pass rushers in the league. And TJ is one of them, but even if he isn't necessarily the greatest pure pass rusher in the league, his impact as an edge rusher specifically for our scheme, I still feel is unmatched around the league because the stuff that he will do seemingly out of nowhere, just it cracks me up at this point. Like it's funny to watch for me at this point because other guys just don't do stuff like this. And it's not even necessarily that they like can't, but they're not even asked to because they know it's stupid to try to ask an edge rusher to do stuff like this. But he does it. He has a feel for the game that just it feels like, you know, obviously he has the bloodlines with JJ and like it's a football family, all that stuff, but there's instincts to him that just kind of transcend his already existing talent. And it's plays like that where it's like, okay, well, I have to be out here in coverage. Let me actually try to make a play and not just look like I'm doing something. I saw a couple different podcasts like just rave about that play in particular because they're just like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, how is he making plays that most linebackers can't make, like actual off-ball linebackers don't do? And it's just funny to see, right? So you got to start with him.
Yeah, I mean, the instincts, it's almost Polamalu-esque in
it's
a way.
Funny. It's just weird.
Whatever you ask him to do, like he's so dynamic in the player that he is. And obviously there's a lot of great pure pass rushers, guys who can get to the quarterback faster and more routinely than what Watt can, but they can't do the collection of the things that Watt does for the Steelers. And for most of these guys, even in the top guys in the league, you are wasting reps if you drop that guy back into coverage at all. Not really the case for Watt because he is such a playmaker. And you talked about how he came off of his guy to undercut that pass and then take it 24 yards the other way, set up the Steelers for an easy touchdown there, 7 yards away from the goal line. And so just the stuff that he does like this, it might only be sometimes a play or two a game because, I mean, Sean McVay's plan was we are going to take him out of the game. We are going to neutralize Watt. I watched the game the following morning. He was chipped and accounted for almost every single pass rush rep. And sometimes that they had 3 guys on TJ Watt.
Yeah.
And so
they had like
you're trying to take him completely out of the game.
Like the tight end.
It's the right philosophy for an opponent because the Steelers can't get a ton of pass rush without him. And at times Watt and Highsmith would both double. They were trying to force Ogunjobi and the interior defenders to win when they couldn't do so consistently. Dotson pretty much stonewalled Ogunjobi on a lot of those reps there. But even when you try to neutralize Watt, he will find a way to make that splash play. He seems to always do that. And so obviously he's one of the winners in this game. I would point to a winner-loser combination, a couple of them, George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. I think that they both had really strong games here, came alive big in the fourth quarter, made some huge plays, but they were also kind of bozos at the same time. I mean, you're getting both of them getting a pair of taunting calls collectively at the end of the game when you need to put this game on ice. You've got to put the Rams out of their misery here, and you've got to put this game away. And both of those plays could have cost the Steelers. They're fortunate that they didn't. And obviously you go back to the image of Tomlin kind of have his arms around both guys. And I wonder what was going through Tomlin's head at that point and what he's saying to them. Tomlin is a very much a player's coach that way. And so I'm sure it was encouraging looking forward. It wasn't the same response. I don't think that Bill Cowher would have had, spitting all over those guys with the crimson chin there, but you can't make those mistakes in these moments. You just can't do it. If that would have hypothetically cost the Steelers the game, it's all anybody would be hearing about right now is two taunting calls in that fourth quarter that could have killed this team.
Yeah, and so we know Steelers receivers have that in them for whatever reason. Like especially the last decade or so, like feels like every receiver we have has a little bit of that goofiness to them. And ultimately, it ended up being mostly harmless, luckily. But I
Yeah.
think these guys too, like they, especially Deontay, like he's been out most of the year, so he comes back, he's making big plays, he's psyched. Like these guys know how good they can be together, and I think that they kind of let it get over their head a little bit in this game. And especially George, like he had a couple penalties. Like admittedly, the crackback block, like it wasn't that egregious. It was just clearly like not allowed anymore. So like I'm not gonna hate on him too much for that one because he's a guy who wants to be in every play. He wants to help block and do this stuff. So I like that mentality. So I'll leave that one kind of alone. The taunting penalties, again, like Deontay with the shush, like I get it. It's a former Steeler. You probably lined up against a ton in training camp and whatever else. There's probably some like not bad blood, but like just competitiveness there. But you got to think about the situation more. And I think that these two haven't been able to show their talents the way that they should in this offense for really the whole time they've been together now, a year and a half. Having a game like this where they combined for almost 200 yards, I think really got them kind of going. The juice is flowing a little bit, and this might happen sometimes with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's part of the game. It's part of what we come to know from wide receivers in general around the league.
Really, yeah.
But there was also a play earlier, Shayne, I thought that Najee could have been flagged for taunting. I mean, Najee got right in somebody's face. Like, I love the energy and passion that these guys are showing. They're coming across the country. They want this win badly, and they ended up getting it. But just keep a cool head.
Yeah.
We don't want to see these type of things end up costing them a victory or a spot at maybe a division title, even the way that things are kind of shaping up right now. So this race is so tight in the AFC North. It's going to come down to the wire between a few of these teams. But there was that going for them. If we look on the other side, Shayne, Levi Wallace, I mean, I was even though they did pick on Akello a little bit in this game, the Rams cornerback now, I was really wishing that those roles were reversed and Witherspoon was on our team because Levi Wallace could not stick with Puka Nacua. He can't do it. And it's not that Nacua is an overly fast guy. I just think that I think he's kind of done, Shayne. I think that he's done. He came in as a slow guy. He doesn't have it anymore. According to Pro Football Reference, Wallace has given up 401 yards and 4 touchdowns in 6 games this year. The play is really, really bad. And I think that he's just detrimental to this team. It allowed them to hang in the game and to get a ton of yards after the catch on a lot of these plays. Just can't stick with receivers.
Yeah, the play that I think of is that crossing pattern that he ran that ended up going up the sideline when Wallace tried to chase him and just didn't even get close.
Just a simple drag, and he was dusted from the beginning.
And it's just, I think at this point we've talked a lot about Levi out this year, right? And like I hate to keep harping on the guy because like he's getting thrown out there, and let's be honest, he shouldn't be on the field. Like you're honestly like you're kind of almost punishing him by letting him go out there every week and getting his ass beat. Like that's just what it is. Like you can sit there and say, okay, you know we have these veteran corners. We want to get them on the field. We trust them more. At some point, that trust doesn't matter because he's not giving you what you need at that position anymore. And it's why we're going to be talking about, trade deadline situations, things like that for the Steelers here coming up next. One of their biggest targets, honestly, if you want to elevate this team for the rest of the year, has to be at boundary corner because these guys, frankly, especially Wallace, can't get it done right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's been an issue all year long. Not surprising to see that happen again against a talented Rams receiving corps. At the same time, it is worth noting that this is the first game, Shayne, that Joey Porter actually earned more snaps than Levi Wallace, which is an encouraging sign.
Yes,
it should never reverse. It should never go back the other way.
No.
And Porter, again, had another solid game. I mean, right now, if we're just using like the PFF rankings, I mean, the eye test will tell you the same thing, but Porter is far and away the best corner on the team. Although the sample has been smaller, he's the eighth ranked corner in the NFL right now. Levi Wallace is down at 105. Shannon Sullivan's down there at 113. By the way, there's 115 qualifying corners in the NFL, not where these guys need to be at all. I do want to highlight one more winner here, Shane. I'm going to give a little bit of credit to Kenny Pickett where credit is due. The guy comes alive in the fourth
He
quarter. I don't
does.
know what it is. I want to see it happen earlier, but I don't want to critique him too harshly in this game after a performance where he averaged 9.2 yards an attempt. He stood tough in the pocket, and he stood in there with Aaron Donald barreling down, and he delivered some nice passes. He could have averaged over 10 yards an attempt if Pickens didn't bail on the one where Yeast was about to take his head off, which kind of don't blame him for doing that.
Yeah, it is what it is.
But it could have been a little bit higher, and Jaylen Warren also had a drop in this game. So I thought that considering the game plan, what he was asked to do, I think that Pickett had a pretty strong and encouraging performance, especially late in the game. And that's typically the way that it goes. Now 6 game-winning drives in the fourth quarter for Kenny Pickett. That ties Ben Roethlisberger's career high in any season that he's had before. So that part of his game is impressive at the very least, if nothing else. Anybody else you want to highlight from that game?
I did want to throw out, even though I still don't agree with the decision to start him, I do think Dan Moore played his best game, maybe of his career, honestly. Not saying that's a huge milestone for a guy that hasn't really had many great starts in his career at this point, but he looked like an NFL tackle more than he has in a long time, and I'd still like to see him either play right tackle or just not play if it means Broderick Jones gets to play. But I can't sit here and say that he was a problem at all for this team in this game. So at least there's that.
Yeah, definitely an improvement. He did have one ugly rep that I noted against Aaron Donald, but the overall game, like you said, it was good. Doesn't mean it might have been the right result, but I still think it's the wrong choice overall, personally. But you're right. I think that he did have one of the best games of his career, and the line as a unit looked pretty solid overall. All right, let's move on to our first discussion topic of the day. If you guys are here joining us in the live chat, please drop your questions for us. We'd love to get to those and get this conversation rolling here. Let's talk about the trade deadline coming up, Shane. Halloween deadline this year. All trades must be finalized by 4 p.m. Eastern time. Last year, surprisingly, the Steelers were sellers at the deadline, and they got an offer they couldn't refuse for Chase Claypool. You have to pull the trigger on that.
For sure.
The second round pick of the Chicago Bears, who weren't very good at the time, although we didn't know that pick would end up being 32nd overall and would turn into Joey Porter Jr. So I don't think there should be a soul out there who's upset about that one, although I can fire off a few names who questioned it at the time when I'm like, don't question. This is good stuff. I mean, this Claypool was struggling. You get the draft capital. You get that player that you need, because I could see kind of the demise of Claypool happening, and he's just not the very natural receiver. He's not catching on. But I feel like I like going that direction. I also don't mind going the other direction when you are able to, and when you are able to get like a blue chip piece, like a Minkah Fitzpatrick that Kevin Colbert did in 2019. Which way do you think the Steelers are going to go, or in which way should they go, Shane? Should they be buyers or sellers at the trade deadline this year?
So one real quick note on the Chase Claypool situation from last year that I think is both funny and also a little bit sad, because like I don't hate the guy personally, but he has yet to win an NFL game since being traded. His teams have not won a game when he's been active since that trade. And I think it's an insane stat, because like it's not like he even really factored in that heavily to most of those games realistically. So just a little tidbit that I thought was interesting. But I don't think the Steelers should be heavy sellers or buyers. I think if they are going to trend in a direction, it should be buying, specifically players that either maybe are being undervalued, or players that need a fresh start somewhere that are still young and have potential to grow. Or just players that are on like the last years of their deal, where you can get them for this year, see if they are a good fit for you, and then think about an extension or something like that in the offseason. How good of a player you can get in that situation is always very iffy, because it feels like teams other than like the Eagles don't really know how to properly trade in the NFL. Like it's just trades don't happen at the frequency that I personally think that they should, and for the type of capital that they should. Now, GMs are very finicky people. They're usually much more interested in getting draft capital. They're more interested in trading in that sense and less players to players. But I think that if the Steelers are going to attack anything, it should be in a buying sense and not trying to sell off any pieces.
Yeah, I think that's the way that they will approach it, just because of how things have gone so far this season. And even if they went the other way, Shane, it's hard to think that they would do the Claypool trade routinely.
Nothing like that. Nothing like that.
Let's trade away an asset for draft capital. I just don't think that that's the overall team's philosophy, mentality. I know it's not Tomlin's. Tomlin wants to win. He wants to win each year. He doesn't want to play for the following year. So I do think the Steelers would be buyers, if anything, at the deadline. And Shayne, I think that personally, I think that what the Steelers can't really do is sit and do nothing. I mean, that's kind of my philosophy is I don't believe this team is good enough. Unfortunately, I'm just trying to be as real as possible. I don't think they're good enough to win a Super Bowl the way they are right now. And if they're not good enough to win a Super Bowl, what is the goal here? Are we trying to say, let's be a 9-win team and get into the playoffs? Or are you trying to win a championship? Because if that's what you want to do, you might need to make a move. So I'm also good the other way as well, Shayne, to say, all right, the Steelers do have maybe this piece on their team that might not be part of the future plan, and the Steelers can get really good draft capital for a guy who might not be around or who's going to take up cap space or whatever have you. I'm comfortable, and I would at least explore the option of going the other way. Like if the Chiefs come at you and say, hey, I really like Deontay, I want a receiver that can separate, I'll give you a second and a third, something like that. And I would be really hesitant, or I would the other way, not to consider something like that, because I don't believe this team is ready to win right now. I think that they might be a year or two away still at this point. Now, if you really want to be that contender and you want to do it this year, despite what everything says, even though you're -4 points per game in the point differential, the collection of their statistics shows that they should be about the 25th or 26th best team in the league right now. Obviously, the record is better than that. So I still think, though, that you can be a move or two away from giving yourself at least a viable shot, Shayne. Like if you didn't have Levi Wallace starting, we know that Dan Moore isn't going to be the starter permanently, but obviously the Steelers are comfortable enough with him for now. There are moves you can make to go out and get a guy who can help you right now, and they can make that difference right now. And you might not have to give up elite draft capital for some of the guys that can do that. Having said that, my thought, Shayne, at the same time is like, all right, the Steelers, how many years in a row did we see that stretch where they would trade away a 4th or 5th round pick to get a guy that would come in and do next to nothing for them? The Nick Van Nett trade, the Avery Williams trade. I am not a fan of those type of moves that don't move the needle one way or another. I'd rather just go out and sign a free agent, quite honestly.
Right.
But if I get somebody I feel like can really help the team, I am for that. And so if you ask me, Shayne, I think the Steelers will be buyers, but I think that I would be willing to go either way, depending on what offers were out there and who those exact players were. Do I believe that they can really help me elevate this team to give yourselves at least a shot to win playoff games? Or do you need to go and kind of start preparing for what's next, 2024, 2025, and see what's after that? If they do go out and target some players before the deadline here of these next 6 days, Shayne, what positions do you think that they would be looking at?
I mean, the number one position is corner. We've harped on that a lot throughout the year. These guys just frankly aren't good enough. You hope that Joey starts to get to a point where he's playing most of the snaps, if not all of them, at left cornerback, and then you start deciding things from there. But realistically, Patrick Peterson probably needs to be playing in the slot more, which he did this past week, but still probably needs to be a permanent move. Levi Wallace just cannot be on the field if this team wants to field a competent passing defense. Again, especially if you want to take the pressure off of the pass rush to have to basically manufacture plays for themselves and not allow big plays in the passing game just based on their play. So that's the number one thing. I think in more interior help, especially if they're not going to play Keanu Benton more, like that's another thing that we've talked a lot about. If you're not going to do that, fine, then go get somebody who you will play more, I guess. I don't know. It's just, especially with Cam, like he's going to be coming back very soon here, you hope, but he's obviously already been injured this year. You don't want to rely on him too much if you don't have to. Getting some more interior depth there. You know, Adams has been hit or miss, but he's fine, but he shouldn't be playing, 70, 80% of the snaps. Like that's just not the type of player that he is. It should be getting that type of snaps. And then I don't think offensive line is going to be out there to get. That is going to be, a huge upgrade. And if we did try to upgrade, it's probably going to be somebody who has a pretty massive contract, if I had to guess. So I don't see that happening. But if you could get an upgrade at right tackle, if you don't want to play Jones for whatever reason, you don't want to move Dan Moore over there, then that would be great too. If maybe you could offload a core force somehow. I don't know who would take him, but his contract isn't exactly a big deal at this point because it should be pretty much over at this point now as far as dead money and stuff like that. But definitely corner and interior defensive line are my top two things there.
Yeah, I think that's it's pretty easy to determine. I think for most fans would agree with that. And you look at the Steelers defense specifically right now, Shayne, like they're eighth in EPA. You
Right.
get Cam Hayward back. Maybe you just are a piece or two away on defense
Maybe.
from having a really, really good unit. Your offense obviously still needs work, and there's holes around the roster, the ones that you've already pointed out. But there are guys that theoretically, yeah, if the Steelers were able to get a little bit aggressive at the trade deadline, if they were willing to do that and maybe part with some day two capital, then you could get yourself in a position where you're going to have a really, really good defense late in the season and potentially into the playoffs. So let's talk for a second, Shayne, about some of the dream trade scenarios. I came up with a couple of these dream trade targets for the Steelers before the deadline. Now, obviously, depending on how capital works out and other factors here, would we be willing to do these becomes the question. But these guys, I think, would be awesome fits with the Steelers. And there's no doubt in my mind that they would help elevate the play of this team. So I want to run through a couple of these. If you guys have any thoughts and you're here joining us in the live chat, please enter those in the chat here. And I'd love to hear what you have to say. One of my favorite players out there that has been floating around the market, Shayne, is Bears cornerback Jaylon Johnson. I was a big Jaylon Johnson fan coming out of college. I just liked his game and I loved his tape a lot. And I think he's been excellent this year. I think he's been like a borderline top 10 NFL cornerback, despite all the garbage that's around him right now and how bad Chicago is doing. This is the perfect type of team theoretically to trade with, because I know that Chicago's got a ton of money
Already
to
done
deal
it
with.
once.
And we've done it once, which might make them hesitate.
Yeah, they might not.
All
Hey,
right,
the Titans
I'm
just
not gonna let
traded
you
with the
drop me
Eagles
like that.
again, even with the AJ Brown thing. So maybe it's
That's
not a
true.
big deal.
So that didn't stop them. They had short-term memory loss there. So
Yeah, I guess.
I think that Bears could be willing. The question becomes, they've got loads of cap space, so you can get a deal done with Jaylon Johnson. That's not an issue.
Right.
But at the same time, they could be looking at it like, hey, we are a bad football team right now. We're on pace to get like the first and third overall pick in the draft this year. We could get even more draft capital. We could take Pittsburgh's second round pick, something like that, and get rid of a player that we don't have to turn around and pay a big contract to. And we can go and spend huge in free agency. However much money we want to throw at free agency, we can do that and get a second round pick in the process, something like that. I think for the Steelers, something like that might be worth it, because if you are going from Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace at corner, and then all of a sudden you have Joey Porter and Jaylon Johnson playing, two guys that are playing like top 15 players at their position right now in the league, and you go and get Cam Hayward back in a couple of weeks, I mean, this defense can turn around on its head real fast. And I think that would be something that would be super intriguing to me. How would you feel about a trade like that?
So I think Johnson himself is a good fit, and I think he's a really good player, like you said. And he is coming off his best game of the season this week. Granted, it's against the Raiders, who are starting Brian Hoyer, who, yeah, whatever. I do think that the trade would make sense for the Steelers more than the Bears, because I do think this is a player that they don't want to let go, because they've developed him. He's played like a very good corner for them for several years now. And like you said, they have the money to get a deal done. And he actually, I think a story came out this past week that they are working on contract negotiations as we speak. So it feels like there's mutual interest there by both sides. So I'd be surprised if a deal got done. But this is the type of move you make if you're going to make a big move, because this is a player that, yes, he needs a new contract, but he's still a younger player. He has upside theoretically, or at least a guy who's going to maintain his level of play probably for the next 3 to 4 years, you hope, and could actually be a piece not only this year, but could be hopefully around if we do figure things out offensively in the near future to make this a more truly like competitive, playoff caliber or playoff winning team, ideally.
Yeah, and for the Bears, it's totally understandable if they don't want to deal him, because they don't have that much talent on their roster, and he is quite honestly one of their top 2 or 3 players on their entire team, and so he's kind of one of those building block players. I don't see them trading him either. I do think it would be a great fit. You can get it done at the right price, and I think that it would greatly improve the Steelers' defense. You go from Levi to Jaylon Johnson, and it makes a world of difference in your secondary. I think it also makes it so Minka can make a bigger impact in the secondary as well. Corners that can cover an extra second or two, Minka's going to make a lot more plays in the back end. One that's even bigger than that, and one of the biggest names circulating out there, maybe the biggest this year, Shayne, is Pat Surtain too. His dad obviously was the all-pro corner back in Miami. He's an outstanding player in his own right. And he's on again, another really, really bad football team in the Denver Broncos, who did just win another game. But nobody's buying this team. Nobody thinks that they're any good at all. They're locked into one of the worst contracts in the league in Russell Wilson's deal. The difference here, though, Shayne, is the Broncos don't have money to work with. Like, they are already looking ahead to next year. They are $12 million in the hole, according to Over the Cap. And so they can't as easily as the Bears get this deal done. Now, they will get something done. If they don't trade Surtain, they will obviously get something done with him. They'll push money back. They'll cut other players. They're going to keep the best player on their roster. And that corner who should have a great NFL career already has the Pro Bowl All-Pro reputation. So he is one that, no doubt in my mind, he can come in very Minka-like, and you would make a drastic difference to this defense from day one. He's still playing at a pretty high level, not as high as last year, but also the team around him is atrocious this year. I mean, they gave up 70 points in one of these games through 3 quarters. So, and that really doesn't all fall on him. It's just because the rest of the roster is so bad. If they were willing to do something, Shayne, would you be okay with parting ways with your first round pick, first and maybe a future day 2 pick?
I think this is the type of trade that if you're going to go all in, this is what you have to do. You have to go for a player that's this caliber, right? We've already seen it work with Minka. This would be a very similar, like you said, move in terms of you're going to get a top flight player for a high price, but a player that should be able to make a huge impact on your team, not just this year, but into the future. I do think this one's almost feels more possible for some reason to me, and I think it's because of Sean Payton seemingly not liking anybody in that organization except for maybe like the undrafted rookie that he plays constantly in the McLaughlin. He's good. Not saying he shouldn't play him. Like, it seems like the only guy he likes for some reason. Like, whatever the case may be, he's clearly trying to tear this team down and build it in his image. And I would assume that he's smart enough to know that that should include this player with Surtain. But like, who knows? Like, if someone's willing to give him a first and third or something like that, or maybe you give him a player or two or something that he likes, he could be willing to do it. Now, I think that'd be a mistake by him, but I'll take that if he's willing to give it, right? Like, this is the type of move, like I said, if you're going to make a huge move, it has to be something like this. Like, don't go in between, go either fully after it or add somebody who at least can make an impact for a little bit. Like, don't split the difference there.
Yeah, and corners like Pat Surtain do not come around very
They
often.
do not. They certainly do not.
So at the same time, though, you can kind of get where Peyton would be coming from if he decided to go that route, because you could say, hey, we are in the cap hole next year already. We could get loads of capital by just dumping the rest of the talent that we have and truly hit the reset button and say, all right, we're going to have money to work with now for the years in the future. We're going to have lots of draft capital that we can go in, and I can kind of build the team the way that I want to. But at the same time, I do think he's one of those blue chip players that you don't give up. I would be interested. I'd be very interested, Shayne.
Absolutely.
Even though, like I said, I don't believe the Steelers are contenders, but this is the type of piece that makes you a contender. This is the type of piece that makes you from the 8th EPA defense all the way up to the 1st or 2nd. Like, I think he can make that big of a difference, especially when Cam comes back here, that you can say, yeah, my defense is going to hold other teams. I'm going to score a little bit more, hopefully, than I've scored in the first half of the season.
Hopefully.
And then we're going to go on a run. That one would be interesting to me. A few more here that I have. One guy that it hasn't really been talked about, but I want to throw him out there, is Derek Brown. I love Derek Brown of the Carolina Panthers. 6'5", 325-pound guy, can get a little bit of pass rush prowess, can defend the run. He's just a big, stout defensive lineman who's been really good for his whole career, and he kind of flies under the radar because he's not the flashiest defensive lineman, and he's also in a really bad organization. But this team should be selling. They should be selling right now because they just have no hope. And I know that you don't want to make your roster worse around Bryce Young. You want to give him assets, but maybe part of doing that, Shayne, is saying, all right, we're gonna ditch Derek Brown. We're gonna get a little bit more money, draft capital to work with, and we're gonna load up on offensive players around Bryce Young next year. Get some offensive linemen, get another stud receiver, something like that. I don't know if they would be willing to part with them. This is kind of my own idea, and I haven't really seen his name floating out there. He's again a building block piece who's still a really young guy, but I have no issue with trading for this guy and then turning around and paying him, because the Steelers need to find these eventual Cam Hayward replacements. I think that Benton is going to be one of them. You need still if you don't have a Cam Hayward, you need the to the Cam Hayward. And so if Benton's going to be the lesser version of Cam, well, maybe get a better version of Tuitt. I don't know. I think that Derek Brown is really good. And so I think that that the collection of those two could make up that interior defensive line for the future. And I'd love to think that Cam is going to last forever, but we're talking about a guy who turns 35 years old in the offseason. He's coming off of a big injury, a groin tear this year. We don't know if he'll be the same when he does come back. So I think that this is the type of piece that you need. And the Steelers' run defense has really been struggling. Like Ogunjobi and Montravius Adams, I went on Twitter. I said, you cannot play these guys on the field at the same time in running downs. Like they have no anchoring strength at all, and they get completely washed from the play. So what Derek Brown would offer you is the exact opposite of that. Like he's an incredibly stout football player who can two gap, who can take on blockers, and who can give you a little bit of pass rush prowess. Honestly, probably better than what these guys have given the Steelers anyway, outside of Keanu Benton. So I like that one. What are your thoughts on Derek Brown if the Steelers were to try to gauge the interest with Carolina there?
Right. I think the only main hang up there, other than like what kind of capital do they want for a player like him, because outside of Dexter Lawrence, as far as like true like nose tackle types, there really aren't many that are pass rushers enough to warrant like a ton of draft capital. Now Brown's up there in that conversation for one of the better nose tackles in the league. So like you could wonder, what can they get for him? Is it a second round pick? Is it even a first round pick? Because he's still a young player. My question is, are the Steelers willing to pay another front seven player upwards of $20 million a year? Because that's what he's going to get. Because if you're a really good interior defensive lineman in free agency, especially now, you're going to probably get $20 million a year plus, if not more than that. So that's the only question is, how much do they want to keep investing on the defense in terms of money? Because they do still have some time before they have to pay their offensive players that are worth paying. But it would be a tough sell, I feel like, especially for fans. Like, granted, they don't care, but clearly, if they cared, there'd be a lot of things that are different, which may be good, maybe bad. But I think that one is the one that's kind of like, I like the thought of it because he feels like a Steeler, right? This feels like a guy who'd be a great Steeler. It's just, does the logistics work out for them?
Yeah, it's always stomaching the blow of that double gut punch, right? It's like it's taking on the big contract that he's going to have, and then also the draft capital. Yep, on top of that. So if the price is right, like you got to meet that sweet spot where the price and it pays out with the benefit for the Steelers. Like maybe if it's a second and a fourth round pick or something, and then you go and give him the contract, get to keep your first, something like that makes you instantly jump up as one of the better run defending teams. I think it helps the linebackers out immensely. So I do think that would be a very fun move. I don't think it's one that's probably on the table for the Steelers, especially knowing that Cam should be back here in the coming weeks. Just a dream trade scenario of mine.
I did want to throw out another couple guys from the Panthers real quick, actually, because now this would be, in the case of one of these corners, it would be more of like a rental / you see if he can kind of get back into form. But Dante Jackson looking like a guy who's going to get traded. He's a really good athlete, much better athlete than anybody we have a corner right now. Having a rough year, but again, Panthers are having a rough year. You wonder if maybe playing in a scheme like ours would be a little bit better for him, a little bit more aggressive. Can use that athleticism a little bit better. His cap hit next year is, I think, about $15 million, but he has like a $7 million cap hit in 2025 that you can maybe move that money around a little bit, kind of even out that cap hit. He could be a guy that at least would be a really good placeholder that would actually have the athleticism to do something while he is a placeholder, whereas, Levi Wallace really can't. And then a buy low candidate because of injuries. Now, granted, this would have to be a very small deal if I was willing to do it because of it. But J.C. Horn has been really, really good when he's played. He just doesn't play, right? And you wonder if he can get right if a team were to take a chance on him and say, hey, we'll give you a mid-round pick. It sucks, we know, but like he hasn't played for you. He's not helping you. You can move on, figure something else out. I don't see them doing that because I think they want to give him the chance to come back healthy, but that would be an interesting move if you could do it.
Yeah, 100%. And J.C. Horn would be really interesting to me because this was a player who was really good in college, had a ton of upside and explosiveness. And so he's just been so injury prone.
Yes.
I think I would take that gamble at the right price for sure.
Right.
I think I like that a little bit more than Dante Jackson, who's
an older guy, more of a placeholder
who also
type
has
of thing.
an injury history as well. And so I would love to potentially hit on the upside of that and see where that takes you. But I don't know if the Steelers are really in a position where they would want to gamble necessarily. I think that I would like to at the right price, but I'm glad you brought those up. I've got a couple more here, Shayne, and then we'll move on to our Steelers versus Jags preview for week 8. The two other dream trade targets that I have for the Steelers, this one doesn't make a ton of sense logistically once we break it down because the Steelers already have 2 wide receivers and one of them with a contract. But Jerry Jeudy is a guy, again, from a dumpster fire Broncos team who they could potentially decide to move on from. And Jeudy has played primarily from the slot this year. And so there you go. That fixes the Allen Robinson problem. It fixes your slot receiver problem. You now have a 3-headed monster at receiver with George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and then Jerry Jeudy in the slot. I think that he's a twitchy player who's a good route runner who can be reliable presence for Kenny Pickett over the middle of the field. So that one would really have me intrigued because, again, we need to make sure that Kenny doesn't bust. I think that that's one of the biggest things the Steelers that they should be thinking about is how can we ensure that this is our quarterback? How can we make sure that this guy does not bust? Even if Jeudy comes at like a rental, essentially, it might be worth it in the long run if you say yes. If Jeudy is going to make it so you're not looking for a quarterback next year and that Pickett really steps up his game, then this is something that the Steelers should consider. I just don't know if it's anything that would be on the table at all. It's kind of just from my own perspective saying, all right, Denver, again, you're going to be 12 million in the hole. The Steelers could use a much better slot receiver than what they've been getting out of Allen Robinson, and in the misuse of Calvin Austin when he does see the field, which isn't very often these days. It's something that has me intrigued to have a receiver like that manning that position.
I think for me, Jeudy was a player that I was really high on coming out of Alabama because of the route running, because of the way he was able to separate so easily. And he's still shown a lot of that in the NFL, but the hands consistency has been a huge problem. He seems to have like some stuff going on that kind of feels like a Steelers receiver, but not in the good way. If you know,
definitely does, which hopefully drives the value down.
Exactly. But I wonder, the problem is I don't know if this offense can handle a third receiver right now in terms of like actually giving them the amount of attention that would be worth adding. And as much as that's like, it's kind of a cop-out answer for why I don't really like the trade, but it's true. Like Canada, he's lucky he's got 2 receivers that can get 70 yards, right? Like adding Jeudy would theoretically be a good move. It's just, would he take advantage of it? Would he be able to use him in a way that's really worth giving anything for? I kind of lean no, but at the same time, like he's a player that is worth buying low on because of the talent level. It's just, are we the right team to do that? That I can't really say.
I totally understand that for sure. Now, my mindset is, boy, if you can add a player like Jeudy, and you go from Robinson, who creates no space and nothing after the catch, to a Jeudy, and hypothetically, you increase your offensive output by 2 or 3 points per game. That's well worth the trade because now you can start to get in the conversation where you can be a competitor. At the same time, though, it might be a rental basis. The Steelers would probably have to decide between Jeudy and Deontay going into next year. They probably wouldn't be able to pay both of those guys. And so not very realistic, although I do think it would be one that would in some ways make sense for both teams because the Broncos need to kind of unload, get under the cap again, get some draft capital to start their rebuild. In the Steelers, it would give them a big upgrade at the slot position there. Last one I have for us, Shayne, and this, in some way, it might be the least likely of them all, just because nobody trades good offensive tackles. They just don't do it. But I would love to see the Steelers take Trent Brown from the Patriots. The Patriots don't have much going for them. They did get a win, an unlikely win, but I still think they're a bad team overall. I think all the metrics and the analytics show that they're a pretty bad team. I think that maybe Belichick is starting to understand that at this point. Trent Brown is one of the best right tackles in the NFL. And I'm not buying into a core four as more than anything other than a high-end swing tackle. I don't think that he should be a full-time starter at this point in his career. Brown would give you an instant upgrade at that position. He'd give you more strength and anchoring ability at the right tackle position. And I would love that outlook. Now, Brown is an older guy. He's 30 years old. This is basically a rental basis. You're going to get a couple good years out of him. You're going to have to pay his contract. But it does open up that window, extends the window a little bit for you here to say, let's take advantage of Kenny Pickett on a rookie deal. Let's go out and make sure our offensive line is as good as it can be, so that when we do trade out Dan Moore for Broderick Jones, and now we trade out a core of four for Trent Brown, I mean, we really don't have many weaknesses outside of Mason Cole at center. And so you can give a Pickett a pocket that he can sit in all day.
Yeah, I think that move obviously makes sense. I think the main issue, like you said, is just teams don't trade good offensive linemen because there's not that many in the league. I do think it makes a little bit more sense to do something like this if you're the Patriots now more than ever, just because, like you said, he is 30. He's not going to be a long-term fixture probably, even if he has played for them for several years now. And they're just not a great team, and they really need to do a whole reset going into this offseason if they want to get back to to contention. So it could be possible. I feel like, unfortunately, what I would have rather happened or have happened now in hindsight. Granted, I like all the players we drafted, but DeJuan Jones has been pretty good for the Browns.
Yes.
And I really felt good about him as a player on tape, and then obviously all the stuff in the offseason was weird, and like leading up to the draft, and it kind of soured us on him. And it seemed like the NFL too a little bit. That's why he went in the fourth round. But I mean, that would have been obviously great too. But if you want a player like that, which is kind of who I think he translates to in the NFL, is Trent Brown, this would be a good move because, again, we don't have a right tackle right now that can really move the needle in any way, and unfortunately, that's just what Chooks is. And you hope left tackle is solved with Jones and or Moore, however that works out. But right tackle, unless Moore moves over there and can play better than he's played in the past, then it's still going to be an issue.
Yeah, I was a big DaJuan Jones fan too. Just
Yeah.
watching his tape at Ohio State and just seeing that you are the most rare human being in terms of your body type and the length and the strength that you possess. You outweigh guys like TJ Watt and Nick Bosa by 100 pounds, so they can't go through you. And
Yep.
he's had a really strong start
He
to
has.
his career at right tackle. I think he has a chance to be one of the better right tackles in the league for a long time. And so that was one when the Steelers started passing him up. I'm like, oh man, this is a guy that I love. I have the value is excellent at this point. Not complaining about Steelers draft class. I think they did a very good job
Yes, absolutely.
in their own right. But that I agree with you there. It would be nice to get that bookend right tackle at some point for the Steelers, and maybe they will target that next offseason. All right, if you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. Shayne, let's get into our Steelers versus Jags Week 8 preview here. The Steelers are sitting on a 4-2 record, as surprising as that is, considering how they played at times this year. But we think we may be starting to trend in the right direction. Finally, it took us a little while to get going here. At least the Steelers, we know that they heat up in the fourth quarter. The Jags, meanwhile, 5-2 team. They're comfortably ahead in their divisional race in the AFC South. The Steelers are going to be 2.5-point underdogs in this game, despite the fact that it is at Pittsburgh at Acrisure Stadium. Is that a fair line? Would you set it that way, Shayne?
Again, unfortunately, we have to consider still, even though we're 4-2, we have a negative 24-point differential still at this point in the season. So, frankly, I think that lines up kind of, right? Like, if they lose, it's actually probably going to be by significantly more than 2.5 points. And if they win, it won't be by much more than 2.5 points. So I think this line makes a lot of sense because they're factoring in, okay, this is a really good Jaguars team. We have struggled against teams that are actually really good across the board or really sound. This is one of those games that could go ugly for the Steelers. So I think they're factoring that in with, even though they're on the road, the Jaguars still giving them those points.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it. You look at the Jags and what they've done. They're on a 4-game win streak now. They've averaged 29 points a game in that 4-game stretch. So it's hard not to take them, even though they're on the road this week. They've got a young roster. I think the Jags are getting there. I don't think that they are that legit contender yet, but I think that they are getting there, and they're starting to show that. And obviously, Trevor Lawrence is a really good football player. I mean, he's going to be that guy for them once he becomes a little bit more consistent here. Point total for this game is set at 42. Let's talk about some of the matchups to watch here, Shayne, because there are some big ones to know. And I want to start with trying to defend Trevor Lawrence, who is right now the 8th best graded quarterback in the NFL so far this season. And you just watch this guy. There isn't very much like Justin Herbert. There's not a throw that he can't make. Like, he stands tough in the pocket. Like, I just love watching. I'm captivated by the way that he throws in the ball placement and the velocity that he can have on some of these deep post routes and deep corners where you are driving that ball a long way and it is not losing any velocity at all. And so he has that pinpoint accuracy there. He makes a lot of big plays. So this is a guy that you are going to have to account for. And it does scare me a little bit going against the Steelers defense, the secondary that has not been able to cover very well. Now, I think they kind of outperformed expectations, even though Levi Wallace didn't particularly do a very good job this past week. How do you think this is going to shape up? Do you think that Lawrence is going to continue kind of this hot streak and get the best of the Steelers defense this week?
So I think there's two very different but almost equally expected scenarios that could happen in this game, and I'll start with the one that is not as favorable to the Steelers. Is he gets off the bus and just lights us up because our secondary can't handle any of these receivers. Like, and I'm not. They've had their issues. Like Calvin Ridley struggled this year for the most part. This could be a game that could be his get right game. Unfortunately, though, because especially with his route running on Levi Wallace, if he gets matched up, that's not going to be good. But so he's either, I feel like it's going to be either a really huge game for Trevor, or if some of the things that have popped up for this team this year already with the mistakes, the fumbles, the inopportune mistakes that happen, this defense is the one you do not want to do that against. Like, do not give them opportunities to make plays because they will do it. That's, I think, the difference is what Lawrence do you get? The one who has 3 fumbles in the pocket for some reason, throws a weird pick, or is it the one who's lighting you up, throwing the ball everywhere across the field, can't do anything about it because he's just better than you? Like, it really could go either way. And like the way I like to look at Lawrence is he's the guy that would be hired to play a quarterback for a Hollywood movie, right? Like, he looks like like this. You watch him throw, the frame, everything. Like, he's prototypical in every sense of the word, right? And when he's on, it's really hard to do much about it because, again, you can't protect every inch of grass, but he can attack every inch of grass. And when you have a quarterback that can do that against a defense that struggles in the secondary like us, it's really about more so how he reacts to the pressure that we're probably going to bring, how he reacts to some of the stuff we do, and less about how good we are not, honestly.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's talk about Travis Etienne. A lot of debate with this guy, and he's kind of back and forth because if you recall, Etienne is the player who was picked 1 pick after Najee Harris. I think that Etienne has had the better career thus far. I had Etienne quite a bit higher on my board, and now I think that, again, it's not Najee's fault the Steelers drafted him in the first round. I'm kind of just opposed to drafting running backs in the first round anyway. I think it's kind of a poor team building philosophy. So those 2 guys won't be playing head to head right here, but we're going to see which one has the bigger game. And Etienne just has that home run ability where you've got to account for this guy, because if he finds a crease, and there's been a lot of them in the Steelers run defense, he can take it the distance. And so I'm a little bit nervous to go up against Etienne this week.
Yeah, I think with him, he is a player that they wanted to use him more as a receiving back, right? When he was first drafted, they wanted him to be an offensive weapon type guy. And I always found that was weird because he was a good receiver in college, but he wasn't like a spectacular receiver, right? It wasn't something where it's like, oh, you have to get this guy the ball 4 or 5 times a game in the passing game or any of that. And him as a runner, he was inconsistent at times, and I didn't love some of his vision, but he's really been a much better runner of the football than a receiver. And I think that was always going to be the case for him, right? If he worked out, it was going to be the home run speed, the ability to turn the corner on runs and make something more of the run than some other guys can do. And I think that's the difference between him and Najee is Najee needs better blocking to be an effective player than Etienne does, just simply because of the burst, right? And it doesn't mean that Najee's not a good player, but I think that Etienne just gives you a better chance of success from the rushing game because of that athleticism, right? We've seen guys who just can't turn the corner, right? They can't get around the edge. They can't burst through the hole and take advantage of huge, gaps in the running game. He can. And until the blocking gets more consistent, Najee's probably going to be a guy that really gets, more than what he would get because of his power, but still not that much more.
Yeah, the thing that scares me, Shayne, is you can bottle ETN up for 14 touches, but if on 2 of those carries he takes them for 45 yards, there's points right there for the Jaguars team, and that is the advantage of having a guy with the home run threat speed like he does. And so the Steelers they're definitely going to have to make sure that they have him contained. It'll be a big test for Steelers linebackers this week, and also I don't want to see their defensive line get bullied because they could have a field day on the ground as well.
Be a huge game for him, possibly, with the way our run defense is playing.
It could be. One matchup that does benefit us is TJ Watt going against a rookie right tackle and Anton Harrison. This is a guy that was first some on the Steelers map prior to the draft, the 2023 draft. Harrison, that ended up being that first round pick, but hasn't really played like that guy yet. They're much better on the other side with Walker Little, who will be going against Alex Highsmith this week. So I foresee a lot of one-on-one matchups that hopefully Highsmith can take advantage of and get a few nice reps against Walker Little, who's been a quality left tackle right now. But can Watt do enough? I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of help coming Anton Harrison's way this week, going up against TJ Watt, and knowing that this game plan has kind of been working when it comes to minimizing Watt's impact as a pass rusher. I would foresee Doug Peterson deploying the same game plan against the Steelers.
Yeah, and I feel like the Jaguars aren't as equipped to be able to do that stuff as other teams are. Like I think the teams we've played that have handled Watt the best overall have just they were always good at kind of mitigating the other team's best pass rusher, right? That's something that they do very well scheme wise. Jaguars, I wonder if they're going to do as well at that. They have definitely struggled a little bit on the line at times. Walker Little is kind of definitely their most solid piece. He's a guy that actually I remember wanting in that draft as well when he was coming out because I thought he had upside as a starting tackle. And what do you know? Guys playing left tackle for the Jaguars playing pretty good. So I think Highsmith is definitely going to have his work cut out for him a little bit. I do think he'll win his one-on-ones pretty often against him if he gets them. But yeah, Harrison really he's a rookie, right? I mean, he's just not playing that well. He's a rookie. It happens. If they don't give him a lot of help, that's where the whole, Trevor Lawrence doing too much thing and holding the football could really hurt them if they do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Walker Little, he was that guy. I think that he ended up slipping because he had a ton of injuries.
Yes, he never played. It felt like at Stanford. Yeah,
but he did have those traits, and it's working out for them there.
Yeah.
I want to see, and I'm currently writing an article on this. So here's a little teaser: the Steelers move TJ Watt around, and they started doing it a little bit, Shayne, but
a little bit.
Do it more. Throw off the scent. Don't let the offense know where Watt's going to be on every single play, because then you can put a guy over there to chip. You can put a running back next to your quarterback in the backfield. So if he does get past the second, third, or first and second line defense, there's a third line defense there. And we saw that there was a couple plays against the Rams where there were three guys blocking TJ Watt. And so obviously his impact's going to be negated if that's how much attention you bring to him. And I don't trust this interior defensive line, Shayne, to make up for that, because Hayward is not here and he's not doing the things that he normally does, obviously. So they have to find creative ways to use him. Do like what Jim Schwartz does with Myles Garrett. Do like what Dan Quinn does with Micah Parsons. Let's get creative with TJ Watt. I wanted to highlight the matchup here between George Pickens and Darius Williams, potentially, that we could see this week, cornerback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags actually have two decent cornerbacks this year, Darius Williams and Tyson Campbell. Campbell's the more probably well-rounded corner because of his size and traits. The reason I say I want to watch Pickens versus Williams, though, is Williams is 5'9", playing on the outside. If the Steelers get that matchup at all this game, you are throwing back shoulder to Pickens, because he's not going to be able to defend it against a 6'3.25" receiver with the ball skills that Pickens has. So I want to see them exploit that this week.
Yeah, and Darius Williams has actually been one of the better corners in the league, in my opinion, as an outside corner at 5'9". He's done it before.
He's been good, yeah.
Yeah, back with the Rams when
it's just a bad matchup for him, though.
Exactly, like that's the one thing that you can take advantage of, and I don't know if the Steelers are going to get that matchup very often for that reason. And also, they play a ton of off coverage, and that's part of why he can play at 5'9", because he can just kind of read the field and make plays off of that. But I do think if that matchup presents itself, obviously, that should almost be a check call. Like, hey, he's on him. I don't see safety help. Even if there is safety help, you shorten up that route, run it to the sideline, throw it up. I do think Campbell's going to get that matchup most of the time, you'd assume, or try to, if they can. But yeah, if you get that matchup, it's going to be tough for Williams to affect that play if he gets that chance.
Yeah, you would think theoretically, assuming that Tyson Campbell plays, because he was injured, but he is practicing from the latest report. And so if Tyson Campbell plays, Campbell would match up better against Pickens, and Darius Williams would be better for Deontay because of his quick twitch ability. But if you do get a 5'9" cornerback against a 6'3" receiver with great ball skills, you take advantage of that matchup 10 times out of 10. And so you hope the Steelers do that. One more matchup here, and this one does not favor the Steelers. Dan Moore Jr. against Josh Allen. Not that Josh Allen, the other Josh Allen, who might be playing better than the quarterback Josh Allen right now. Like Josh Allen, the pass rusher, former first-round pick of the Jaguars, has been really good this year. I think that he's taken that next step up finally. And now I think that he has entered that tier right below the TJ Watts and Max Crosby of the world. He's probably in that like 5th through 9th range there. in terms of NFL pass rushers, it's going to be a tall task for Dan Moore because Allen is bendy. He's strong. He's got a great collection of traits, and he has the ability to be one of those guys who can get to the quarterback in 2+ seconds, give or take a few fractions there. So I think that one's going to be a very difficult matchup. The Steelers are going to have to kind of devote a little bit of attention Dan Moore's way for the most part there, because I think that he could struggle and could have several ugly reps in this game if they don't account for him.
And this is a good example of why, even though he played well last week, Broderick Jones should be starting at left tackle, because that's why you draft him, to handle guys like this, because he has the core strength, the athleticism, the length to deal with players like Josh Allen. Dan Moore really doesn't. I mean, you hope he can hold up well enough, but this is the type of matchup throughout the year so far that has really wrecked him, right? He just can't handle guys like this. And again, it's not his fault. He is a player that is limited, right? And they're asking him to go out there and be a left tackle for an NFL team full time. And it's probably just not the best thing for him. But if he's going to be out there, you do, like you said, you have to devote resources to him. You have to have probably Jalen Warren on that side a lot because he's a great pass blocker. You give him a couple chances to chip him, or to even just be ready to handle an inside move from him if Dan gets, caught up in that way. But it's going to be probably a matchup we just lose, right? Like, just one of the ones that they just chalk it up and say, we're going to lose this matchup. We'll do what we can to mitigate it. But Allen's probably going to have his way with him.
Yeah, and what I don't want to see happen, Shayne, is to say, all right, Steelers, just get the ball out as quick as you can. I want Kenny to be able to kind of
Yes,
create some of those plays. I think that's what he
exactly.
does best. Buy a little bit of time and find guys open. In order to do that, you need to make sure that Josh Allen is accounted for. And like you said, Broderick Jones is a better matchup for Josh
Absolutely.
Allen than what Dan Moore is, because of the core strength and his athletic traits and everything that he has. So this one does scare me a little bit that Allen could be a game wrecker. If he gets a strip sack or makes a few big plays here, it can kind of shift the tides the other way. So the Steelers will have to make sure they account for him. And then obviously one last one is, we got to talk about Kenny Pickett always. How is he going to do against this Jags defense, this secondary? And it's not the best defense in the world, but it's one that it has a few quality young pieces on it. They have the ability to take the ball away with players like Andre Cisco. He's got to be careful at times, but you still have to see him outscore the other team. I mean, it's all about outscoring your opponent. And like I said, the Jags are scoring 29 points a game. If the Steelers can't slow down Trevor Lawrence as much as they'd like to, is Kenny Pickett going to be able to score enough to get the job done?
I think that the key, unfortunately, for Kenny in this game is actually that we have to be able to run the ball well early, because they need to bring these safeties up, because especially Cisco,
Yeah.
he's a guy that I'm certainly concerned about intercepting a pass, because Kenny occasionally will rip one of those down the field and it just doesn't have a chance really, or that he doesn't see the safety, and that's whenever you have an interception, right? And Cisco is a guy also that I really liked a lot coming out of Syracuse, I believe it was. And he was that middle of the field ball hawking safety, and he's definitely
Mhm.
shown those traits in the NFL as well. They have to be able to attack. They have to be able to attack the middle of the field specifically. We say that all the time for this team, but especially against a team like this, where, like, yes, the linebackers are very good overall, but they cannot risk those middle of the field, like straight down the middle throws down the field very often, because that's where this team will take advantage of you in that situation.
Yeah, and Kenny had one of those last week to
Yes,
Connor Hayward right down the seam there that was
should have been
tipped
picked.
by
Yeah,
several players. And so those are the type of plays that they'll have to avoid probably against this secondary, who they are aggressive. They like trying to come up those
yes.
big splash plays. So hopefully he can get the job done. And so let's move on to keys to success. We're going to make our predictions before we sign off for today, Shayne. What is the Steelers' key to success on offense? What do they have to execute well this week in order to, again, pull up another upset win?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I said before. They have to be able to run the ball well, because that's going to mitigate the pass rush a little bit. It's going to mitigate some of the things that the safeties can do when they're in deep coverage, like I talked about. And more importantly, like, they have to get Kenny moving in and out of the pocket, because Josh Allen is going to win his matchups. Let's just be honest about it. Like, Dan Moore, he can do everything he wants. He can try anything he wants. He's probably not going to win this matchup very often. And frankly, Trayvon Walker, as much as he's struggled so far in his NFL career, he's just a really good athlete, and that might be enough against the guys that we have out there to tackle. Like, that
Yeah.
could be simply enough. So we have to count for him more too. He's had a game or two recently that he's had some more pressure, has gotten better, and realistically, just based, like I said, on athleticism, the matchup difference between the edge rushers for the Jaguars and our tackles is massive. It just is. And when you have that, you're going to have to do something to mitigate that. I think the only way that they will do it is probably with the run. I don't think they're going to get creative. I don't think they're going to move the pocket or move the launch point very much, but I'd love to see it in play action. Make them have to respect that, because if they can't just pin their ears back on 3rd and 8 all the time, that's going to be how we can move the ball more effectively. And it's been an issue all year. So it's not just to this game, but especially a game like this where you have a huge, really talented team coming into Acrisure to try to beat you. You have to put all the stops out for that.
Yeah, definitely utilize play action. Keep the guys honest, because they're not gonna be able to go and pin their ears back, like you said, on all these rushes if you're throwing in the play action there. And it's worked for the Steelers when they have done it, albeit limited fashion.
Don't do it. Don't want to do it. So.
No, and also run out of draws. Do draws sometimes, because I think that if they do just come flying around the arc, I mean, draws are a great way to chew up some big yardage, and oftentimes the defense doesn't see it coming. And I think that's the advantage of doing draw plays, and that's something that the Steelers haven't done very often as well. What I really want to see on offense, though, Shayne, my key is let's get Kenny into a rhythm earlier. Let's get some of these quick slant. I love the quick slants. Like, do them all the time. Like, Pickens can box out in the quick slants. He's got the size and frame for it, but he also showed the ability where he can move a little bit after the catch. I think the quick slants might be the best route in football for garnering yards after the catch. And I think the Steelers need to take advantage of that. Try to get him in a rhythm early. Don't wait until the fourth quarter to pile it on. Get some of these back shoulders going, because again, I think that if you want to talk about the Pickett to Pickens connection, that is one of the hardest plays to stop when you have the right personnel. I think that I know that the Pickett hasn't been great overall in respect to the other quarterbacks in the league, but something he does great is he throws a really nice back shoulder ball. And what Pickens' forte is catching that back shoulder pass. So those two play right into each other's strengths in terms of that. Get that going early on in the game, especially if you get Darius Williams on Pickens, like I said. So that's something I want to see happen. Defensively, Shayne, what do the Steelers need to do to come away with the win?
Before I mention that, I just think it's funny that we're at a point now where quick slants are what we're harping on, and we used to hate all the quick passes in this offense, and now it's like we need more of them. It's funny how time kind of it's a result.
It absolutely.
Around. But no, as far as defensively, honestly, it's still the pass rush. I mean, they have to force Trevor Lawrence into mistakes, because he is a guy that's still a young quarterback. He trusts his arm about as much as anybody in the league. Him and Stafford, I think, are maybe like the two guys that look at that just trust the ball in the air more than about anybody else I watch play. And he will throw you a couple if you force him to do so. Like, if you give him an opportunity to where he has to get rid of the football, but he trusts it a little too much, that's when you can get maybe a Minka pick finally, or you can get some turnovers or fumbles or whatever. Like, it's really going to have to be about forcing him into mistakes, because if you don't do that, if you let him sit back there and they can pass block everything up and do that, it's going to be a long day. It just will.
Yep. And you talked about the pass rush. It's so important. I mean, Steelers team, it revolves around
it is literally the engine of our team. Literally.
And if that's not working, you saw like in the Texans game, how badly they struggled. And so you look at what coaches like DeMeco Ryans in Houston did against the Steelers. And then what Sean McVay did this past week, it certainly seemed like their primary goal was, we are going to stop TJ Watt at all costs. We are going to make sure that this player does not shift the tides in this game and turn things around on its head. And I think the Steelers can counter that by saying, we are not going to line up at TJ. I know that you're comfortable rushing from the left side, going against the right tackle, but regardless, we're going to move you around the formation. We're going to have you blitz up the middle against the center at times. And so I think that they do need to switch it up. I think we're the day and age is gone, though, where you can just roll out your defense and say, we're going to line up in the same spot every time, and we're going to essentially do this the same thing with slight variations here and there. You've got to play chess instead of checkers. The good teams in the top DVOA defenses are doing that. Teams like the Browns, teams like the Cowboys are doing that with their premier pass rusher. The San Francisco does it with Nick Bosa. They put him on both sides. It's time to start doing it with Watt. And I don't care where Watt says he's most comfortable. He actually played at Wisconsin. He played a lot on the right side during his rookie season. He played on the right side. He's capable of doing it. He's a defensive player of the year. He's capable of doing it, whether he wants to or not. Have him shift around so that you have to. They're going to spend all the time on the play clock trying to reaccount for where Watt is. They won't be able to do it, but they know where Watt is every time. You're going to be able to account for him. And I want to see a little bit more creativity on the part of Tomlin and Terrell Austin here this week. Let's finally start seeing him used in that fashion. I would love to see that for the Steelers. All right, Shayne, let's give our game predictions as we're running a little long here today. Steelers versus Jags, week 8. Steelers are 2.5-point underdogs here. Trevor Lawrence is coming to town. Jags are on a 4-game winning streak, scoring 29 points a game. Who comes away victorious in this contest, and what is your prediction?
Yeah, so real quick, something I wanted to add to the TJ conversation as far as moving them around. What I would love to see them do a little bit, I think this would be a fun idea, is have him essentially spy Trevor Lawrence in certain situations and have the ability to trigger towards him if he feels he's going to take off, or just try to affect the play like after things have kind of developed for a second, because I feel like that's something that they could do with him a little bit more. And I've seen it worked with other teams where you kind of just have your best guy just like watch the quarterback that is not a good athlete and has the ability to run, and let him just decide, okay, when is it the time to trigger back? Maybe I can find a passing lane, because obviously we know he's capable of doing that. Like that type of creativity is also something I'd love to see. But of course, it will not happen, but just wanted to throw that out there. As far as prediction goes, I do trust this team at home to figure something out offensively and do enough defensively to really have a good shot in this game. The Jaguars are still a very young team. They're still a team that is prone to mistakes. They're going to give you a couple opportunities, like I said, to take the ball away, to limit this offense. And frankly, the offense sometimes is just going to shoot itself in the foot. Like they've had a lot of drop issues. Like I said, Calvin Ridley especially has not come on yet. I do worry that this could also be the game, like I said, that he does come on and figures it out, unfortunately. But if he doesn't, I do think we have a really solid shot. I'm going to say the Steelers hold serve at home 24-20. Really close game for the most part, but the defense makes enough plays and the offense gets something going late, as always. And essentially, the Jaguars, I'll put it this way, the Jaguars are not winning by more than 10 points at halftime. We'll probably win the game because that's how this works. So
it seems to go that way, Shayne, doesn't it? I'm going a little bit different here. I know that the Steelers are playing a young team, a young quarterback who I mean, Lawrence has got some experience under his belt now, but the Steelers still, they do typically pretty well in these type of games. They've won a couple straight now against Jacksonville, even though they struggled like in the early 2000s. That was always their kryptonite. Like Rasheed Mathis
loved to play the Steelers.
Oh yeah, and it was always like these game-changing play. Yeah, but they have won a couple straight against Jacksonville now. Having said that, I just don't know. I don't trust yet, Shayne, the Steelers to be able to say, all right, if you score enough on me, can we counteract that? And can we outscore you still? I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. I think that that Steelers could have a costly turnover or two in this game because of this aggressive defense, right? Because of the matchups that we have this week. I have the Steelers losing this one 20-23. I've got Jacksonville taking their 5th straight and advancing to 6-2 on the season, because I do think that they're a little bit of an underrated team. I think that they are getting there to be one of those contenders. I think that you can make a case that they are like a top 4 to 6 team right now in the NFL, especially with other teams dropping off a little bit.
They've been playing.
And I think that they have a chance to make a statement here with what they do in Pittsburgh this week as well. I do think it's going to be a close game. And so if you're betting that game line, I think it could go either way. That 2.5 point, I think it's right on the head. It could go either way there. But Shayne is taking the Steelers this week by essentially a field goal. I'm taking them. I'm taking Jacksonville the other way around. Let us know what you guys think. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this game, and we'll see how this turns out here on Sunday. We go live every Wednesday on this show, even when I'm sick and I can barely talk. We're going to try to get it done. Right. So thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.